Well, thank you for joining us. This will be Creation Science Evangelism Class 103, CSE 103. If you missed the first two, 101 and 102, you can get those on videotape. What we're doing is we're covering what's on my seminar on creation at a much slower pace, covering all the details, taking time for any questions. And if you have any questions, if you're in the class here, of course, if you're on video, you can write us in or call us with questions. But here in the class, if you have any questions, raise your hand and say, wait a minute, what does this mean? Or let's talk about that some more. We left off in our last class talking about the lies in the textbooks, things that kids have to face every day in school. They faced them today, things that have been proven wrong many years ago. Some people would like kids to believe in evolution. They want them to believe that we all came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, and they have to give them some evidence. One of the evidences presented in just about every textbook is this one right here. This textbook says we have evidence of evolution from micro or molecular biology. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, molecular, of course, means at the molecule level, very, very, very tiny. And biology is the study of life. Bio means life, ology means the study of. So they're saying the study of extremely small branches of life, the molecules, gives evidence for evolution. Well, now, does it really? Let's just talk about that. A molecule is very tiny. A good illustration to understand how small a molecule is, best one I know of, is a grain of salt. You know how small a grain of salt is, right? 1 cube of salt is very tiny. If you took a grain of salt and expanded it so that it was as tall as the Sears Tower, 1,200 feet tall, I believe the Sears Tower is, and 1,200 feet wide and 1,200 feet deep. If you expanded it to that size, the molecules would expand at the same ratio. They would become large enough that they would become the size of the original grain of salt. How many grains of salt would it take to stack up to be equal to the top of the Sears Tower? Several, right? That's how many molecules are stacked up the side of a cube of salt. So molecules are extremely tiny, and they're telling the kids here we've got evidence from molecular biology. Well, in the early 50s, Jan, did you find anything about DNA in those old textbooks? Not even mentioned. 1911 biology textbook doesn't mention DNA at all, does it? How about the 1925 textbook? No mention at all. What do you find in yours, Steve? About molecular biology. Or DNA.
DNA. I got that 3 natural processes underlying evolution.
They emphasize evolution in every case, right? Did you find it in yours about DNA? Yeah, in all the new textbooks, those are 98 edition textbooks. I've got some 2001s in the office. I couldn't find them in a hurry there, but all the new textbooks say DNA offers evidence for evolution. Well, now, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a molecule. The DNA molecule is the most complicated molecule in the universe that is known today. This textbook says the greater the percentage of DNA sequence, the greater they have, the more they have in common. In other words, they're comparing the sequences and saying this proves some kind of similarity. This textbook says Darwin speculated that all forms of life are related through descent with modification from earliest organisms. Earliest organisms. This speculation has been verified as we have learned more about molecular biology. Now look what they're teaching the kids in this book. They're saying Darwin guessed that everything was related. Now we know it's true. That's the propaganda the kids have to face. Now we know it's true. Now just hold on a minute. If there are similar DNA sequences, and we'll get into that in a minute, would that prove we're related? Or could it prove we have the same designer? Would you agree that the Ford and the, let's take the Ford Lincoln, say Lincoln Continental, and the other cars built by Ford Motor Company have lots of similarities. Probably many of them have a radiator in the front, and a front bumper, and a back bumper, and 4 tires, and the tires are round as they can make them. Does that prove they all evolved from a golf cart? Or could it prove they have the same designers, the same engineers? So what happens here, we get into a logical fallacy. They say, well, look, because we're similar DNA to these organisms, therefore we must be related. I say, no, no, no. We have a common designer. So don't fall into the trap that this proves evolution or even helps to support evolution. It does not. This is a lie that's in the textbooks that kids have to face every day, and they'll say, well, we've got proof for evolution from DNA. This is a picture of a DNA molecule. If you took a ladder If we had a long extension ladder, a real long extension ladder that went about from here to Chicago, and we had one end, somebody holding that end still in Chicago, and here I am in Florida, and I start twisting my end of the ladder, and twist it around and around and around, sort of like twisting up a watch band, okay? The individual rungs of the ladder are called the genes, G-E-N-E. So when they talk about genetic similarity, that's what they're talking about. These genes are similar. So if we have this ladder that goes from Florida to Chicago, and we have twisted it up in a long spiral, the two sides of the ladder stay the same distance apart, but it kind of curves as it goes around, and the rungs of the ladder, the round part, will hold it that distance apart, but now it's like a spiral staircase. If we twist it and twist it and twist it, it starts pretty soon to knot in on itself, so it's actually double twisted. And you can tell by the picture here, if you take a DNA molecule and unwind it, it becomes incredibly long. You figure the average human body has 50 trillion cells. The only cell visible to the naked eye is the egg cell that a woman produces in order to have a baby. All other cells in the body are too small to see without at least a good magnifying glass, and in most cases, a microscope. With a real strong magnifying glass, you can see cells. You can we did experiments in biology class where you take a popsicle stick and you scrape the inside of your cheek, and you can get skin cells off very easily. Put it on a piece of glass, stick it under the microscope, add a little iodine, and it'll stain the cells, and you can actually study the different parts of the cell. A cell is sort of like, I guess an egg is the best example, at least in an animal cell, because they have an outer membrane that is soft, and then all the stuff, there's thousands of things inside the cell. One cell is more complicated than a city. But inside the cell is another little membrane that holds the nucleus. Like inside the egg is the yolk, the yellow part to the egg. Inside that nucleus are the DNA molecules. So we're talking really, really tiny. DNA wasn't even discovered until probably the middle of this century. You can see the old textbooks don't even mention it at all. I meant to get some of the 1940 textbooks I've got, and 50 and 60 textbooks, and compare and see when they began talking about DNA. It'd be a good research project somebody could do. But Francis Crick and somebody else, I forget his name, got a Nobel Prize for discovering the DNA molecule. I think it was in the 1950s when they got that. So they called it the double helix because it twists and then it twists again while it's twisted. Those DNA molecules are incredibly tiny. But if you unwound one of them, it would be about 6 or 7 feet long. 46 of these DNA molecules, and one DNA molecule is called a chromosome. Each chromosome contains millions of genes. So the gene is like the rung of the ladder. The entire thing is called the chromosome. You have 46 of these in each cell in your body, except for the gametes. Now a gamete is a sex cell. The egg and the sperm are called gametes. They each have 23, half of the genetic information. And when a woman gets pregnant, the half from the male and the half from the female join together and makes it back to 46. So a fertilized embryo, a fertilized egg, now has 46 chromosomes. You've got half from the mother and half from the father. So during the process when it divides, it's called a gamete. See, these chromosomes, about 46 of them in every cell in a human. Average human has 50 trillion cells in their body, which is a number that is just beyond comprehension. For those that don't remember, when you count, a million is the number 1,000 with one more group of zeros. So it would be 1,000 plus 3 more zeros. A billion has 2 sets of zeros. So a total of 9 zeros. It's 1,000 plus 2 sets of zeros. And a trillion has 3 sets of zeros. If you learn to count in Latin, you can count as high as you care to go. Million for mono, billion for bi, like a bicycle has 2 wheels, trillion for tricycle, like 3 wheels, quadrillion would be next, like a quad runner or something with 4-wheel drive, quadratraction for the Jeep. Then quintillion would be 5 sets of zeros plus the original 1,000. And then sextillion, septillion, octillion, novillion, decillion. And who cares, right? Anyway, so a trillion cells is an awfully lot of cells. When you figure the entire population of the planet is nowhere close to this number. There are only about 6 billion people in the world. This is 50,000 billion cells in your body. Each one of those cells contains a little nucleus in the center, and the vast majority have 46 chromosomes. A few have 23, the gametes do. If you took all the DNA out of one person, it would fill about 2 tablespoons. Teaspoons are the small ones, tablespoons are the big ones. It would fill 2 tablespoons with just pure DNA. If you took 1 chromosome from every individual on the planet, and this chromosome, each chromosome contains the blueprint, the instructions for how to build the entire person. So if you had 1 chromosome from each person on the planet, theoretically you could make every person again. You have the information to make a new Becky or a new Steve or a new Eric or whoever, okay, from 1 chromosome. All of that information, 5 billion or 6 billion chromosomes, would be about the size of an aspirin. That's the information capable of making every human being again on the planet. That's with our current understanding. We may discover later that even this is mostly space and it could be condensed even smaller than that. Just unbelievably complicated. Now, if you unwound each one of those chromosomes, number 46 in each cell, each one is about 6 or 7 feet long. So you get 6 or 7 feet times 46 times 50 trillion. One person's chromosomes would stretch from Earth to the Moon and back. Round trips, 5 million round trips to the Moon. And keep in mind, that is like a twisted ladder. Now, to make it even more interesting, if we had our ladder from here to Chicago, and we twisted it and twisted it and twisted it, and as you, like you do a rubber band, you get it tighter and tighter, and pretty soon it starts to double knot. You know, it starts to loop again. Okay, similar idea. We're going to take this long ladder from here to Chicago and split it all the way down the middle. Each one of the rungs of the ladder is going to be cut in half, all the way from here to Chicago, while it's twisted. It is going to unwind from the other half, so we have 2 half ladders. That's going to join up with the other half ladder from your husband or wife, wind itself back together from here to Chicago, and make a child. Each half of the rung is a genetic trait. Maybe the dad supplies the half of the rung for blonde hair and the wife supplies the half of the rung for brown hair. Well, which one's the baby going to have? Well, that gets into which one of these genes is more dominant. There are dominant and recessive genes. The baby might end up with blonde hair, but capable of producing a brown-haired child. Because even though what expressed itself in that generation was blonde hair, they are carrying the gene, the half rung of the ladder, for brown hair. So then the grandkids come out with brown hair, or depending on who they marry. And that's a very interesting study. You get into that in biology class, studying all the, what can happen when you cross different genes together. But the genetic structure is incredibly complicated. They say that the code in the chromosomes is more complex and holds more information than all the computer programs ever written in the history of humanity combined. Incredibly complicated. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, he said, DNA is like a software program, but it's much more complex than anything we've been able to design. Now, when they design a software program, how frequently do they encounter a glitch or a problem? Do any of you work with computers at all? You ever seen a computer have a glitch where the program doesn't work? All the time, right? Now, suppose I told you to take your computer program, we're going to load Windows Millennium Edition, or Windows 98, or Windows 95, okay? Any one of those programs. I want you to take that program with all that list of instructions and copy it onto a disk. Now I want you to take that copy and copy that onto another disk. Then take that disk and copy it onto another disk. The more times you copy it, the more likely you are to have mistakes come in, problems come in. You ever seen a photocopy of a piece of paper where somebody copied an article and somebody else said, wow, this is good, I'm going to make a copy of this. So they copy the copy. Then this person says, wow, that's really good, I'm going to copy that. So they copy the copy of the copy. After about 8 or 10 copies, you can't hardly read it. You ever gotten something like that? You just say, wow, it's all blurred, everything starts to run together. We are a copy, off of a copy, off of a copy, off 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 a copy of Adam. Do you realize how many times this gene code has been duplicated? And still working pretty good. The original must have been awesome to have this number of generations of copies still working at all, you know. So to say DNA is small and therefore it must be simple is absolutely ridiculous, okay? It is unbelievably complicated. If you typed out the code, now here's what happens. A DNA has 4 base pairs. What they've done is they've taken each of these genes and they get a whole cluster of molecules and call it a base pair, like they give it a letter A. So they will say, well, DNA is very simple. There are only 4 base pairs. Well, hold it. That's like me saying, you know, vehicles on the highway are very simple. There's only 4 basic kinds. You know, there's trucks, there's cars, there's motorcycles, and there's buses. Well, just because I can put them into 4 simple categories doesn't mean each one is simple. Each one of those categories is very complex. You know, how many things are there on a car? Remember, Eric, the first car you had, you know, 13 years old, we rebuilt that old Datsun, or whatever it was, Datsun 510. A car is complicated. How many things would have to be wrong to make a car quit working? Any one of thousands of things. When my dad was in the Marines, he said during World War II, one of their jobs was to go into the islands after they took over from the Japanese, set up radar, the early days of radar. My dad was involved in that, and they had a diesel engine. The engine ran a generator to power, to give them electricity to run the radar station. So they had to be really good mechanics. If anything goes wrong, you got to fix it. As part of their training, they would have somebody come in there after they learned all about the engine, how it runs. They would sabotage it to make it not run, and you had to see how long it took you to figure out the problem. Can you imagine all the neat things you could do to cause an engine to not run, to give somebody a hard time? You take the distributor cap off, take a pencil, whoosh, draw a few lines around there, put it back on. Graphite conducts electricity. So as soon as it tries to spark to one spark plug, the spark goes to all spark plugs. It follows the graphite around the inside. Very simple. Car won't run. He said the hardest one for him to find was when the sergeant came in there and he took the spark plug wires, which are going out. He took a needle, poked it through 2 wires, clipped the needle off, roughed up the rubber so you couldn't tell it was there, but the spark was being conducted from those 2 each time. It's supposed to go to this spark plug, it went to both of them. Engine wouldn't run. He said that was the hardest one to find. Just a simple thing to sabotage it. When you think how the more complex something becomes, the easier it is for something to break down. Look at our space shuttle. You know, we had one blow up. One little O-ring. Out of X number zillion parts on that thing, 1 part went wrong. I was driving on the highway one time in driver's ed. Here I am, teacher sitting beside me, 2 students in the back seat. The car in front of me, in the other lane on the interstate highway, the front wheel began to wobble back and forth wildly. Pretty soon the hubcap flew off and sailed right over our car, just like a frisbee, or like a flying saucer. I speeded up to get past him, because I knew something was wrong. What had happened, the tie rod that ties the 2 front wheels together had broken. And so his steering wheel is controlling one wheel, the other one's flopping back and forth. Well, which way's the car going to go? I don't know, and he didn't know either, and I didn't want to be there to find out. So I just took off and got past him to avoid, but just one little part, a little tie rod broke. In radar, Steve, how many things can go wrong to make your radar station quit working? Anything, right? And it's usually something different every time. DNA is incredibly complicated, so you're going to find some people who mistakenly think that a DNA molecule, they'll say it is very simple because there are only 4 base pairs. That is like saying, you know, traffic patterns are very simple, there's only 4 kinds of vehicles. It's not quite that simple, okay? Matter of fact, it's a long ways from being that simple. If you typed out the genetic code found in the chromosomes of one person, when you got done typing, you'd have enough books to fill Grand Canyon 40 times. An incredible amount of information. Do you realize how many bits of information are required to make a hair? You ever look at a hair under a microscope, you'll say, man, that thing's unbelievably complex. Now, how does the hair on your arm know to grow a certain distance and stop? But the hair on your chin just keeps growing. How do it know? You ever wonder about that? I mean, you got the hair, then you got the molecules that are producing the hair. And then, if you get a cut, you cut your arm right across a hair follicle, how does the skin cell know, when it fixes the damage, if it's going to make, you know, which kind of skin cell is it supposed to, make to repair the damage? The information contained in the chromosomes is incredibly complicated. Oh, King David said in Psalm 139 many years ago, he said, "I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." He didn't even have a microscope, and he knew he ought to praise God. The body is incredibly complicated. So I get nervous when these folks say, well, the body, DNA is very simple. Well, they don't know what they're talking about. DNA is complicated. When a baby is conceived, it begins to multiply. The initial cell splits in half. So here's what happens. You got these 46 chromosomes, one fertilized egg cell. Each one of those 46 chromosomes, from here to Chicago, each one, inside that little sac, unwinds, splits in half, makes a copy of itself, and winds back up. And then makes two cells. You get about 15,000 new cells per minute for 9 months. Each one of those cells is more complicated than a space shuttle. Now, I say in my seminar, how would you like to work in a factory that produced 15,000 space shuttles a minute? When I worked at General Motors, truck and coach, in Pontiac, Michigan, we made 250 trucks in 8 hours. There was a new truck that came by every 1 minute and 45 seconds. I did my thing on the front end. We put the headlight clamps in and the springs and all that to hold the headlights and the grill and the radiator clips, sent it on to the next guy. He bolted the fenders on, sent it to the next guy. He put the radiator in, and started putting the fan shroud on and sent it to the next guy. He flipped it over, put the headlights in and the chrome rims on, sent it on to the next guy. Every minute and 45 seconds, a new truck. We had to work hard with an awful lot of guys to produce 250 trucks in 8 hours. The baby growing in the mother produces 15,000 new cells every minute, round the clock. And I'll say in my seminar, how would you like to work in a factory making 15,000 space shuttles a minute? How would you like to be in charge of supply? Suppose, Steve, your job was to supply the springs that hold the headlights in, and you got to bring enough to the factory to supply 15,000 a minute forever, never nonstop. You'd be busy running back and forth getting new springs, wouldn't you? A lot of women say, yeah, I did that for 9 months, man, it's hard. Sometimes the baby wants pickles in the middle of the night, you got to go get up and go get them, So you just never know. I really worry about folks, though, I think Satan has blinded people into thinking, because it's smaller, therefore it's simpler, and that just simply is not logical. The DNA is the most complex molecule we know of. They say the probability of one DNA happening by chance is 1 times 10 to the 119,000th power. Now, if you don't know the way powers work, 10 to the second power means 10 times itself 2 times. That's 100. 10 to the third power is 10 times itself, 10 times itself, times itself. That would be 1,000. It would have 3 zeros, 10 to the third power. 10 to the 119,000th power is 10 with 119,000 zeros behind it. Those big numbers get lost easily in the human brain, so a good analogy to help folks understand how big this is. If you measured the size of the entire universe, as far as we can see, estimates are the universe currently that we can observe with our current telescopes is probably 15 to 20 billion light years across. At the speed of light, which is pretty fast, take 15 or 20 billion years to get across the galaxy, the universe that we see. Change that to inches. That is 10 to the 28 inches. The current observable universe is 10 to the 28th power inches in diameter. That's a huge number. 10 to the 29th would be 10 times bigger than that. 10 to the 30th is 10 times bigger than that. 10 to the 119,000th is real big. So that's the odds that these people are gambling on that a DNA could happen by chance. I tell people, look, if you want to believe that, that's perfectly fine. I don't care what you believe. They say the odds of a DNA happening, there's all kinds of analogies have been given to try to help people understand. If you filled the space of the entire solar system, you got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, way out there. If you filled that entire space with pennies, painted one of them red, let a blind man loose, he has one chance to find the red penny. Those kind of analogies help you understand, and the brain can't absorb this no matter how you try to explain it, but that's the chances of one DNA happening by chance. Well, I did a spoof on evolution, I call it, just as fun, because I knew that the chromosome number does certainly not follow the expected evolutionary pattern. Since each chromosome is the most complex molecule we know of, I said, you know, the more chromosomes you have, the more complicated you would be. And I've had, of course, evolutionists, they blast every sentence in my seminar, and they've blasted this one saying, oh no, it's not the chromosome number, it's the number of genes. And you know, because some chromosomes are longer than others. You know, how many rungs on that ladder for a human versus how many rungs on that ladder for a hamster, okay? There are different lengths of chromosomes. All chromosomes are not equal. They've not even all been studied to know how many genes there are on each one. But the number of chromosomes also has a factor involved in the complexity of the organism. Penicillin has 2 chromosomes. So when a penicillin divides or grows, it only has 2 chromosomes that have to unwind, split, copy themselves, and wind back together. Which of course requires a lot of energy for this to happen also. And that's another whole long system on how Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, explaining the complexity of the cell, is really amazing. Well worth reading. But fruit flies have 8 chromosomes. So I put these animals and plants and things in order as a spoof to make fun of the evolution theory, how that, you know, the more complex you get, the more you evolve. And how penicillin evolved first and slowly turned into a fruit fly. And over millions of years, got some more chromosomes and became either a tomato or a housefly. They're twins, you know. Nobody can tell the difference between a tomato and a housefly. They both have 12 chromosomes. This would be like the number of instruction manuals to build that organism. A tomato and a housefly, same number of chromosomes. Does that prove anything? Slowly it evolved into a pea, of course, with 14 chromosomes, and then I add the numbers up. These are the actual number of chromosomes found in these organisms. Now, possums, redwood trees, and kidney beans all have 22. Proving, of course, you know, they're twins, identical triplets this time, you know, closely related. Most people can't tell the difference between a possum, a redwood tree, and a kidney bean. Average scientists can't, that's for sure, because they're, you know, obviously identical. And then slowly, over millions of years, we evolved enough chromosomes and finally became a human. Humans have 46. What happens if a human gets extra chromosomes? Anybody know what that's called? Sometimes kids are born with 48 chromosomes.
Really?
Down's syndrome. Mongoloid. Extra pair of chromosomes. Is it advantageous? No. It's a disadvantage. 46 chromosomes. Now, if we can just get 2 more chromosomes, we should be a tobacco plant. They have 48. They're way ahead of us evolving. And you can see, obviously, tobacco and chimpanzees are twins, you know, identical. Dogs and chickens are also. They both have 78 chromosomes. Now, why would a chicken have more chromosomes than a human? And then, of course, slowly over millions of years, we got enough chromosomes to become a carp. More than twice as complex as humans. A simple carp. And a fern has 480 chromosomes. And some evolutionists will argue, yeah, but the number of genes is different on these things. Okay, but they're missing the entire point. Probably intentionally, they're missing the point. But this textbook, and like most textbooks you have there in front of you, will try to show the kids that DNA similarities proves some kind of relationship. Here's what they've done. You take the chromosome of a human, let's say, and there's only 4 types of base pairs. I think they label them A, D, I used to know the names of them, I'm going blank right now. But they give them a letter. Let's call it A, B, C, D. That's not the right letters, but it's close to that. They will take the sequence. They'll say, look, a human's, the sequence, like the code, is, you know, A, B, C, D, D, A, B, A, C. And they put this long sequence of letters, okay? Then they line up the sequence of letters for a chimpanzee. And they find how many places do they match. Look at that. In the 7th column, they both got an A. Wow. And in the 10th column, they both have a B. Wow, that proves we're related. I don't know how this logic got into there, but that's what they think. So they've compared these long sequence of letters. I guess they have nothing else to do with their grant money. And they compare these long sequence of letters and say, humans and chimpanzees are 98.2% similar. So when they say the DNA is similar, they're saying the sequence of these base pairs matched 98% of the time. Well, Jan, you've taught English for years. I'm sure you could think up all kinds of sentences that are 98% similar. Only a few letters are different. but the sentence means something very different. You only got to change a letter here and there to totally change a word. Nick, trying to learn English, you know how many words there are? There's only one letter different, and it's a totally different word. Very difficult. And Russian probably has the same thing, right? With different words, look almost the same. One letter's different, means something totally different. We ought to go through, somebody maybe could do that, is make a sentence or a paragraph that is 98% similar, but have a totally different meaning. That'd be a neat spoof to do. I'd like to have one to use in my seminar here. Does that prove they're related? Absolutely nothing. This has nothing to do with relationship. The fact that all forms of life, or all these chromosomes, have the same 4 base pairs is like saying, you know, and they'll say, see, that proves evolutionary relationship. I would say, now wait a minute, you can come to my library and you'll notice all the books in there written in English have only 26 basic letters. Same 26 letters used over and over and over and over again. Aren't they? Does that prove they're related somehow? No. That proves that's the code you write words from. And the code you write chromosomes from is this base pair code, which proves the designer thought, you know, I'm going to make them similar so that the brown cow can eat the green grass and digest it. If each organism had its own separate code, like when I try to see the Russian words or the German or the French or the Italian as I travel around, a lot of, like Chinese, Jan, you over in China, they have a different code. They don't use any of our letters. You not only have to learn the language, you have to learn the letters. That's where it's a little easier to learn French or Spanish. At least they've got the same letters we do in most cases, a few different. Russians, of course, make their R backwards from us, and whatever that means. But the code has some similarities, but it also has some differences between these languages. The code for life is pretty much the same. And some have argued that's evidence of evolution. No, no, no. That's evidence that the designer made it where we can, you know, eat and digest these things. If they all had different codes, it wouldn't work. Eric, if I gave you a Russian newspaper and said I want you to cut out the letters and reassemble them and make an English sentence, you probably could do that. If I said I want you to cut out the letters and make a whole book, well, you probably eventually are going to come across some letters that Russians don't have, that you need in English, but they don't have one available. Same thing if you're translating from Russian to English, okay? There may be some letters, I don't know which ones, that just, they don't exist. Do you have an X in Russian? You have an X? Do you have the R facing the right way, or just the backwards R? Just the backwards one, not the regular one. So you'd be hard-pressed then to make a lot of words. How many words have an R that you now cannot make? It would greatly limit your ability to write that book. Certain words you just can't use, aren't any available. So if there weren't similarities of these base pairs and of the amino acids and in the chromosomes and the DNA structure and in the molecules and in the proteins, we couldn't digest anything else except other humans. That'd be very unhandy after a couple of generations. So they'll say, you know, orangutans are 96% similar, and the textbook shows the kids a graph here and says, see, this tells how many millions of years ago we evolved from a common ancestor. Well, that is just silly, okay? It doesn't prove we evolved from a common ancestor 15 million years ago from a monkey group. It could prove we have a common designer and the same guy wrote these codes. Certain authors, when they write, they'll use certain words over and over again. And sometimes they have certain styles of writing, you know, these different authors do, but judging by that. Same DNA code would prove the same engineer wrote the codes, not evolution. So why the textbooks always teach the kids this is evidence for evolution is beyond my comprehension. Either they're not capable of thinking, maybe this proves a common designer, or they're running from that designer, like Romans chapter 1 tells us. They do not want to retain God in their knowledge. And so they only see it one way. All right, we'll talk about thinking critically after a little break here. Okay, let's continue now. I want you to see what this textbook says. This is common propaganda, for lack of a better word, in a high school textbook, talking about how they're going to teach the kids to think critically. But look at the way they phrase the sentence. Question number 24. Inferring conclusions. Boys and girls, we're going to learn how to infer conclusions here. How might the structure of plant cells be different if eubacteria had not evolved? Well, doesn't that question assume they evolved? You see how the propaganda is built right into the question. Suppose you got a Christian student in this class who does not believe in evolution. He believes God made everything. How is he supposed to answer a question like that? What's he going to do for homework? How's he going to answer that question? He's really stuck. He's not learning to think critically. He's learning how to be taught what to think. Question 25, inferring conclusions. If insects had not evolved wings, how would it have affected their invasion of land? What a stupid question. Assuming, of course, they evolved wings. Look at this, number 26. As you learned in chapter 2, all living things make proteins from the same 20 kinds of amino acids. Let's back up a little bit here. An amino acid is sort of like a letter of the alphabet. There are 26 letters in the English alphabet. Would you agree that all English words are made out of those 26 letters? The little words and the big words all made from the same 26 letters. Okay? The proteins in your body, you have protein for your fingernails, protein for hair, protein for eyeballs, protein for skin, protein for muscle. All proteins are made from the same 20 amino acids. That's a fact. Look what it says. Explain how this fact, and it is a fact, supports the idea that all life shares a common ancestor. Anybody got any ideas? Is that the only conclusion you can draw from that? Eric, what would you say this proves? Probably had a common designer, right? Sure, all the books in my library have the same 26 letters of the alphabet. That proves they all evolved from Morse code millions of years ago. No, it doesn't. It proves somebody's using the basic code to write their thoughts down. And the proteins are all based on these 20 basic amino acids. And again, that's so the brown cow can eat the green grass, who gives the white milk, and you churn it and get yellow butter, and I eat it and get blonde hair. Because these 20 amino acids get broken up like chopping up the letters of the newspaper and reassembled to make a new protein. So when I eat something, your body breaks it down and reassembles it into a new protein that you need. Similar structures nearly always have similar plans, in this case DNA. Similar bridges have similar blueprints. This hardly constitutes evidence that one sired the other or that they were erected by tornadoes. So how people can be so blind as to not see that similarity does not prove a common ancestor, it does prove a common designer. They're too complex. People have a pretty good understanding of how cars work. I've had 111 cars now as of this time. I've done just about everything you can do to a car. Rebuilt the motors, the transmissions, the differentials, a lot of body work, stuff like that. I don't have time anymore, but I've done a lot of that stuff. Started teaching my kids when they were little bitty. My daughter's water pump went out on her first car. Dad, my water pump's out. Would you fix it? No, ma'am. I'll help you fix it. She said, I'm a girl. I said, I know. What if it's going to break down in the middle of the country someplace? You better learn how this thing works. And so she changed the water pump. I mean, of all the things to learn working on a car, a water pump's a little tough to get at. You got to undo 14 other things to find the water pump and then change it. Well, she did it. I didn't touch it hardly. I just stood back and said, okay, now do this. See, this is in the way here. That's what you're trying to get to. If you thoroughly understood a car, if you did enough mechanic work, Steve, you're going to be an airplane or jet pilot, you're probably going to have to understand those jets pretty well. Lots and lots of training on how they work. If you ever thoroughly understood everything on a jet, would that prove nobody designed it? No. You couldn't stand back and say, well, because I understand it, therefore nobody made it. That is just flawed logic. See, if you understand how a machine operates, that has nothing to do with the origin of it. I understand the operation of a ballpoint pen. How the ink is in that little tube, and the ball rolls around and it uses all sorts of different physical factors to draw the ink down. There's capillary action used in a ballpoint pen. Does that prove a ballpoint pen happened by chance? No. Just because I understand it doesn't prove anything about the origin of it. And this is where some of these people get confused. They somehow think that operation and origin are related. So if I can understand how it works, that'll prove nobody made it. I don't know how they got there. I use the illustration, you know, if your kids turn 16, like my kids did. There's Canandro on the camera there. He says, hey Dad, I got my license. I want to borrow the car. And I'd say, son, now listen, the car is a complex machine. There are 3,000 bolts required to hold a car together. And one nut can scatter it all over the highway in a few seconds. I said, now son, look, your mom and I have been praying about this. We don't think you understand how the car works yet, son. It's a very complex machine, and we don't think you're ready for the whole car this year. This year we decided we're going to let you have 10% of the car. Next year, maybe a little more, we'll let you evolve into the car piece by piece. What good is 10% of a car? It's worth nothing. You put them in a junkyard. Now, if you're going to study how cars work, it's a good way to learn is by systems. Let's study the brake system. You push the pedal, it squeezes the master cylinder fluid, you know, goes down the tubes to the wheel cylinders, expands the calipers or whatever. Okay, you study the system. Then you study the electrical system or the fuel system or the whatever, okay? And you're probably going to learn jets that way. Here's this system. Here's this system. And then how these systems integrate. You can study the human body that way. It's a great way to learn biology. Let's study the circulation system. Study the integumentary system, the skin. Okay? Study the nervous system. And then how do these systems relate to each other? But understanding the systems has nothing to do with the origin of it. And again, one thing missing from one of these systems may stop the whole thing from working. How many people have a very complex nervous system? They have a brain, spinal cord, nerves going to every cell in the body, but there's a broken place right at the base of the neck because they had a little car accident, severed the nerve, now they're sitting in a wheelchair. Nervous system's still there, one thing's broken. Stops the rest of it from working. Same thing true with any system. You know, the more complex they get, the more likely they are to break down, the more easy they are to have something go wrong. DNA sequences. This fellow from the annual review of ecology and systems says, even with DNA sequence, we have no direct access to the process of evolution. So objective reconstruction of the vanished past can be achieved only by creative imagination. You have to imagine some kind of relationship based upon the sequence. People have argued about what I'm about to say here, but about 1% of the human DNA has been determined. Others have said, no, the Human Genome Project, we've decoded the entire thing. Well, that's very deceitful to say that. Okay? To say we've decoded the human DNA is what they're saying is we've taken this ladder that goes from here to Chicago, and we've got the A, B, C, D components figured out where they are. We've written the code down. Writing the code down in big blocks, you know, A, B, C, or D, does not explain, doesn't mean you understand it. If I flew over, let's say a Martian came in, there are no Martians or flying saucers, somebody will accuse me of believing in them. But let's say a Martian comes flying in, he flies over New York City, he looks down, he notices there are 4 basic kinds of vehicles. In New York City, you got 1 basic kind, taxi cabs, okay? But we'll pick a different city. He's got, you see buses, he sees trucks, he sees motorcycles, he sees cars, and let's add a 5th one, bicycles, okay? And he goes back to his country or to his planet and says, you know, I studied the different cities in America, and I found Cincinnati has a code, you know, it's got motorcycle, bus, truck, motorcycle, bus, truck, car, bus. And I went to, you know, Dayton, Ohio, and they got you know, slightly different sequence, you know, but 99% similar. That proves these 2 cities evolved from each other. No, stop the music, you know. Is everybody that works around here a moron? You know, like who was Ernest said in that movie? Ernest P. Worrell. This similarity would prove nothing as far as relationship or evolution. So actually, to say they've decoded the entire human genome is very deceitful. All they've done is figured out if it's a bus or a truck. They haven't figured out the complexity of that bus. They certainly don't have all the genes figured out in this sequence. So there are thousands of differences. Now, chimpanzees cannot put their little finger against their thumb. You have a muscle that allows you to pull your little finger. You can touch any of your fingers to your thumb. The muscles in their feet are different than your muscles in your feet. You cannot grab around a tree branch with your big toe on one side and your other toes on the other side. You can try it if you want, but I would recommend you pick a low branch to practice on, because you're not going to hang there very long, right? But chimpanzees do it just fine, don't they? It's called a grasping foot. Now that's great when you're climbing around through trees. It's not very good for running on the ground. Watch a chimpanzee's feet when it walks on the ground. They have to curl their toes under. They cannot walk flat-footed. They call them a knuckle walker. They walk on their knuckles. And it's very uncomfortable for them to walk on 2 feet for great distance. They can do it, but they kind of walk bow-legged and their toes are curled under. Humans and chimpanzees have millions of differences. The bones, the muscles, the ratio of the length of the bones. Their arms, of course, are much longer compared to their body than humans are. If you're looking for similarities, you can find them. You know, both have 2 eyes, same hair color in some cases. Sometimes, you know, some humans and chimpanzees both chew with their mouth open. That doesn't prove they're related to each other. The same designer created these things. And how they got to that stage of saying, you know, we're similar, therefore we're related, I don't understand. No, we're similar, therefore the same God designed us all. It's not that complex. Some people, though, say similarities proves relationships. So I did another spoof on this. I'll say, well, if you think similarity proves relationships, let's study the similarity of various objects in the world based upon their water content. Clouds are 100% water. One atheist said, no, they're not. There's air molecules in between. Okay, you're missing the point, all right? I understand clouds have air in the middle of the water. But it's basically water in a cloud. Watermelons are 97% water. Only 3% difference. And jellyfish are 98% water. So here we have the missing link. And snow cones are also 98% water. So this proves that, you know, watermelons slowly evolved into either snow cones or jellyfish. I'm not sure which one. They're twins, you know. And then slowly evolved to a cloud, or vice versa. Arranging something in order does not prove any kind of similarity. Doesn't prove any relationship. Then the textbooks will say that fossils give evidence for evolution. This index to this one, this book has a whole chapter. I've seen some biology books that have an entire unit, you know, 5 or 6 chapters just on evolution. They want to make sure the kids believe that when they get out of school. This one says we have evidence from fossils. Well, let's just discuss this here. Is there any evidence from fossils to prove evolution? Suppose we're in a court of law. I stand up and I say, Your Honor, I can prove evolution. I can prove humans came from a monkey or an ape or an ape-like ancestor. And the judge says, okay, what's your evidence, Mr. Hovind? And I'll say, Your Honor, I found this fossil in the ground, buried in the dirt. And it has characteristics that are some human and some ape. The judge would say, or the opposing attorney would say, Mr. Hovind, if you find a fossil in the ground, all you know is it died. You don't even know where it died. You know where it ended up getting buried, and that's all you know. You sure don't know that it had any kids. If you went to the cemetery and dug up bones of a person, you would not be able to prove it had any children that lived. And you sure couldn't prove it had any different children. Darwin said, though, in his book, if my theory be true, that's an awfully big if, okay? He said numberless intermediate varieties must have existed. Well, you're right. If you're going to change from a rock to a human, how many steps in between would you have to have? Each of them has to be able to live and move around and grow and reproduce and, you know, survive in its environment. So if it can already live and survive in its environment, why is it going to change? They'll say, well, the environment changes, so it has to change. Okay, so you not only have to change the organism billions of times, you have to change the environment billions of times to make the organism want to change for some reason or be able to survive, okay? David Ropp, who teaches or works at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. He's one of the guys at the museum, and he's a strong believer in evolution. He said, in the years after Darwin, his advocates, the people that promote him, hoped to find predictable progressions. By that, you know, sequencing from apes to humans. You know, slightly bigger, slightly bigger, slightly bigger, slightly bigger. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. You're kidding. Fantasy in our textbooks? Yes, there's fantasy in the textbooks. They dig up these fossils. Look, you don't know that it had any kids. And you sure don't know that it had different kids. Dogs today only produce dogs. If you observed dogs spent a lifetime, let's see, I think my daughter Marlissa, she's not here tonight, but she was with me in Ireland. We went to eat at a family's house. The guy raises some kind of, prize dog, and he's real proud of these little dogs that he raises, And he was all excited because one of his dogs was going to have puppies that day. And he's out driving me around to speak at, some radio station. He said, "Oh, I got to get home. My wife called. She's having puppies." "Oh, no, your wife's not having puppies. Your dog is having puppies." He was all flustered about this. He said, "Brother Hovind, you don't understand. These puppies are worth $1,000 a piece." I said, "You're right. I don't understand. Who would pay $1,000 for, that's only going to get this big when you're all done. What's it going to do? Protect the house from the burglars?" Now, Jan, your dog is a little more protection, right? What's that dog weigh now? 80 pounds, German Shepherd. Yeah, now that, I can see a use for that. But a Chihuahua, I don't see any use for a Chihuahua. Somebody goes to break into the house, yip, 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 whap, kick it clear into the next county, Your dog, I would not try to kick into the next county. I would turn around and run. But dogs have only produced dogs. People that raise dogs will tell you. I had a lady tell me, a couple months ago, she said, "Mr. Hovind, my family and my parents and grandparents, we've been involved in raising dogs for, 60 years or whatever it was." She said, "I sincerely believe that we could start with 50 generic mutts from the dog pound. You supply me 50 mutts. Go pick out the mongrel, any mongrel you want. We, with selective breeding, we will redevelop every breed of dog in the world today in less than 100 years. We could get a Great Dane and a Chihuahua and a St. Bernard and an Airedale and everything in between from 50 generic mutts in 100 years. Most breeds of dogs, if you stop and think about it, they were done by man for some particular reason. Somebody in Europe or England or something wanted to hunt weasels or groundhogs that go down in the hole in the ground. So they kept taking the puppies out of the litter that had the shortest legs. Pretty soon they developed a dachshund. Half a dog high, dog and a half long. He can run down the hole after, whatever they're after. Dogs have different characteristics. Those character traits were already in the original gene code. You just select which one you want. Steve is, 6'2"? Becky, 5'7". When you guys have kids, they're going to be real tall. Eric, you were with me with the preacher in South Florida who taught us to shoot the rubber band. Yeah. He was 6'8". His wife was 6'3". Remember the two daughters? The 13-year-old was already 6'3", daughter. The 15-year-old was 6'5". Both of them still growing like mad. This is in Orlando, I think, or something like that. Traits are inherited. My wife is 5'0". I'm 6'1". If I had married somebody taller, my kids would probably be taller. Sorry about that, boys. She's the one I picked, and you get to pick yours too. It was your problem how tall you came out. You can live with that. My brothers are 6'3", and they both married taller women, and their kids are much taller. It's just, but they're still human. Dogs produce dogs. That's all you're ever going to get. So why would anybody think that after observing dogs producing dogs for several thousand years of human history, what would make anybody conclude that sometime long ago and far away, dogs came from something that was non-dog? What justification would you have for that conclusion? There's no observable evidence for it. There are genetic barriers to keep it from happening. Dogs have 78 chromosomes. Adding or losing chromosomes is normally fatal or certainly harmful, like with humans. So doubling the chromosome number, we'll get into that later, polyploidy, doesn't add any new information. Okay, you get those giant strawberries you buy at the store, it's polyploidy. They've doubled the chromosome number. Now they taste horrible, generally. They don't taste near as good as the regular little tiny strawberries. But they say, wow, look at this giant strawberry. This is proof for evolution. No, you've simply doubled the chromosome number. You haven't added any new information at all. Luther Sunderland was studying evolution and wanted to find out where the evidence is. So he visited major museums around the world or wrote to major professors who believe in evolution and asked them, what evidence do you have? They would write back or When he talked to them face to face, they would say, well, we don't have any evidence, but somebody else has it. They all think somebody else has the evidence. When he contacted Colin Patterson is the, one of the curators, the directors of the British Museum of Natural History. I believe it's in London or near there. They have the largest fossil collection in the world. Nobody has more fossils than the British Museum of Natural History. Display rooms and case after case after case of fossils on display that they've mounted and put up for display. Colin Patterson, the director of this museum, wrote a book about evolution. Wrote how he believes in evolution, how this animal changed to this animal. Well, Luther Sunderland read the book and noticed he told us about evolution, but he never showed us any examples. He never showed us the fossil of the missing link. And there'd have to be zillions of these. He said, Mr. Patterson, where are the missing links? I read your book. Why didn't you show us a picture of one? Colin Patterson wrote back a very interesting confession, and he has since been chided for it many times, I'm sure. Patterson wrote back and said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any. You got the biggest fossil collection in the world and you don't know of any missing links? He said, if I knew of any, fossil or living. Now that's an interesting confession. If it's living, how can it be a missing link? Even if it's alive, I would have put it in my book. That's deceitful, okay? He said, if I knew of any fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil. And he goes on to say, for which one can make an airtight or watertight case. If evolution had to be proven in a court of law, it would fail in the first round. Wouldn't make it to the appellate court or the circuit court or Supreme Court. It would fail in the local court. A freshman law student out of Podunk College could say, Your Honor, he doesn't have any evidence for evolution. It would be so easy to defeat this if evolution had to be proven in a court of law. But it doesn't have to be proven in a court of law. Evolution has to only sound convincing to the students going through high school. And that's where the problem comes in, my opinion. Folks, there aren't any missing links. The whole chain is missing. Guys like Stephen Gould, the communist professor at Harvard University, says the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. I sent a set of my videotapes to Stephen Gould. When I went to Harvard, 8 years ago, I guess, I went up there to preach in the area, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I went to visit Harvard. I went to go see Stephen Gould. He wasn't there that day. But I went and met his secretary, very nice lady. My tapes were sitting on his shelf in his office. I was so proud of myself. Wow, hope he's watched them. Okay, Steve, watch them, okay? I want to get you converted. You'll make a great Christian when we get you saved. All right, let's give an analogy to understand, and all analogies break down at some point, okay? But to help people understand a little bit, let's make an English sentence here. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Do you use that sentence in your English class, Jan?
Not yet.
Not yet. You teach English as a second language. This sentence contains every letter of the alphabet. All 26 letters are found in that one sentence. And now you're going to not listen to a thing I say. You're going to sit there and study the sentence. So it does, trust me, okay? The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I could analyze these. Suppose this was Chinese or, Arabic, and I didn't understand anything. This just, to me, it's just a bunch of chalk on a chalkboard, okay? Which is what Arabic looks like to me, a bunch of circles, I don't understand. But they read it, oh yeah, it says right here, or Hebrew, How confusing can you get? Or Russian. But suppose I was going to analyze this just as an outsider who knows nothing about English. I would say, some of these letters are rounded. They have kind of round shapes to them. So we're going to classify them as rounded or squared. Could I classify letters of the English alphabet as rounded or squared and group them? The Q would be a rounded one, the O is rounded, the U is rounded. Then the U actually is more complex. It has part rounded, part squared. So then we're going to have combination. Now the combination letters, the U is a confusing one because the squared part is at the top. The rounded part is at the bottom. Others have the rounded part at the bottom and the squared part or at the top, like the P. This has the round part at the top and the square part at the bottom. So we'll have combination 1 and combination 2. I have basically 4 different types of letters in the English alphabet. That's kind of what they've done with the DNA sequencing. I could say, well, look at this sequence. We have, for this sentence, the quick brown fox. We have square, 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 round, combination 1, square, round. So I could go through and give these a code, S, 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 R, C1, S, R, C2. Does that mean anything? Who cares, okay? That's what they've done with the protein. The DNA sequence, they have said, oh, this is an A, B, C, D. I should look up the 4 letters, the different components of the DNA. Somebody will blast me for this, I'm sure, but I taught this years ago and I just forgot at the moment. Who cares? Okay? And I could compare this sentence to another sentence and probably find another sentence with a very similar sequence of letters. So, doesn't mean a thing. And the fact that there are some similarities of the proteins and similarities of sequences, it doesn't mean a thing. It has nothing to do with evolution. I've done 55 debates at this time against evolutionists. Okay, I'm willing to do any more, anytime. I did one in Ohio University, Athens, Ohio, 4 months ago, I guess. There was 2 professors against me, 2 on 1. I just read on the internet last week, one of the professors wrote about his experience debating a creationist, you know. What was it like? Did you read that, Eric? Yeah, we watched, the videotape didn't turn out very well. The audio was lousy. I wish we could use that because it was really a good debate. But he was whining on the internet, on his website, about how that, you know, it's unfair to debate creationists because, you know, they're professional debaters. I've never had a debate class in my life. Okay, all I know is I'm right, he's wrong. Very easy to win a debate when you're confident like that. So I emailed him back 3 days ago. I haven't checked my email today to find out if I got an answer. I said, because he said in his long diatribe about why you shouldn't debate creationists, he says nobody can possibly be trained in all of the different areas they will bring up. You know, you'd have to be a geologist and a biologist and et cetera, et cetera. So I said, I hereby challenge your entire science department. I will debate all the teachers in your entire university at the same time. On the condition, it's equal time for each position, not each person. If there's 20 of you and 1 of me, I want half of the time. That's fair. That way, if we get into a topic that deals with biology, have your biology teacher answer it. When I debated Pigliucci at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, he is a botany assistant professor, associate professor. His PhD is in botany, the study of plants. I said, Mr. Pigliucci, what is your best evidence for evolution? What's the best evidence you know of? He said, the fossil record. Now hold it. You're teaching botany. Why do you think the best evidence is over in some other department, paleontology? I said, the fossil record of what? He said, the fossil record for the evolution of whales is the best evidence we have. Now think about it. Here's a PhD in botany thinking the evidence for evolution is over in anthropology department. But if you go to the anthropologists and say, where's the evidence for evolution? They'll say, oh, they've got it in the biology department. Ask the biologist, where's the evidence? Oh, the anthropologists have it. Or the geologists have it. Everybody thinks somebody else has the evidence. It's a shell game. You ever see those things at the carnival where they get 3 shells and they tell you to put a pea under there, you know, and the guy tries to get you confused, you know, switching them around? Evolution is a shell game. Each person thinks the pea is under a different one. There is no pea under any of them. Nobody has the evidence. Nobody has ever found any evidence for evolution. That's why about 10 years ago in our ministry we said, look, started off, I guess 12 years ago, I wrote a letter to the editor in the local paper here, and I said, I will pay $1,000 for any evidence for evolution. A lawyer friend of mine a couple of months later said, hey, Mr. Hovind, let's make it $10,000. I'll back you up. I said, 10,000? He said, yeah, that's nothing for me. I got plenty. I said, okay. So made the offer 10,000. Then a friend of mine from Oregon called me and said, hey, Brother Hovind, let's make it $250,000. I'll back you up. I'll keep the money in a special account. $250,000. I can't imagine having $250,000 just to sit around in an account someplace. He said, I'll back you up. So we put all kinds of publishing out there. We'll put $250,000 for Evidence for Evolution. He called me about a year later and said, hey, let's make it $1 million. I said, let's keep it at $250,000. Okay, I've got so much stuff printed that says $250,000. I don't want to go back and reprint everything. You could offer any amount of evidence, any amount of money for the. There is no evidence. Nobody's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog, let alone a dog come from a banana. But if you can ever get the evolutionists to see clearly what it is they believe, and I've never had one admit this, but they do believe dogs and bananas have a common ancestor, and the ancestor was a rock. If you boil it down, that's what you get to. They don't see it. I think what's happened here, we have a Romans chapter 1 situation. They don't want to retain God in their knowledge. So God gave them up to vain imaginations. The Bible says God will send them strong delusion. You have to be deluded to think we came from a rock. Now, if you want to believe that, that's fine, but that's not logical, it's not scientific, and that's certainly not going to help you when you stand before God one day. Some people are going to get before God and say, well, I studied the evidence and I believed in evolution. You had to want to believe that. A logical thinking person won't come to that conclusion from studying the evidence. When you look at a complex thing like a watch, I would come to the conclusion, somebody made this. I don't know who he is, doesn't matter. I don't know where he lives. I'll probably never meet him. I don't have to meet him. I believe he exists, or at least did exist. I've seen what he did. The painting is proof of the painter. The object is proof of the designer. That's all you need. I could probably analyze a few things about, I could tell you a few things about the guy that made this watch. Even though I don't know, never met him, probably never will. Probably speaks Japanese, lives in Japan apparently. I would say he's a logical thinker. He's got the numbers in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. He must think logically. I could probably deduce a few character traits. He must be patient, able to put them little bitty things on there. Must be precise. Must be very smart. He must have a good knowledge of electronics. He must have a good knowledge of different materials. He knows certain plastics can be used certain places, but they couldn't be used other places. You wouldn't want to use plastic in the watch band. How long would that last? You can use it for the buttons. He has a knowledge of quite a few things, a knowledge of materials. Never met the guy, but I can already tell you a few things about him. I've never met God, but I can tell you a few things about him. He's real smart. He's patient. He's loving. Just by seeing the creation, I can determine some things about the Creator. And that's the way it ought to be. All right, next week we will continue with more on, we're going to try to finish up what's on my videotape number 4 of my series and then get into what's on videotape number 5, which is the New World Order. We'll cover that. Hopefully by week 3 or 4 we'll get that far. Thank you so much. See you next week. Okay, by now you should have taken your quiz on the previous lesson we had last week. We're going to start continuing talking about lies in the textbooks, things that have been proven wrong a long time ago that are still taught to the kids every week all across the world. It's not just America. I collect textbooks. I've got them from other countries, and every time I go, I've been to 26 countries. I look in their textbooks. They still teach the same things. This is a universal problem, or at least a worldwide problem. They're teaching the kids the horse used to have 4 toes and it slowly evolved into a 1-toed horse. This whole story was made up in 1874. Let's review a couple of dates here. Back in 1859, Darwin's book was written. 1859. Darwin predicted, we will find evidence for my theory. The theory, of course, says that all life forms have a common ancestor. He said this in 1859, and most scientists at this time rejected it. They said, this is a stupid idea, this is a dumb theory. A few preachers, liberal preachers, who at the same time, there was quite a bit of discussion going on about the accuracy of the Bible, and especially in Germany, they were called the higher critics. They were saying, well, the Bible can't be true because you know, we know the earth is millions of years old. And so they're really attacking the Bible on all sides during the mid-1800s. The higher critics were. So Darwin's book came out and said all life forms have a common ancestor. They said, and Darwin said in his book, we should find evidence for my theory. Over the next 15 or 20 years, a lot of people began to manufacture evidence. What's one of the ones we talked about in the last class about one of the things they document, or in the last CSE 102, things 1869, a professor made up some evidence and was later proven wrong. Who remembers that one? He said, we can prove all animals have a common ancestor because as they're developing inside the mother, they have gill slits. Ernst Haeckel, correct. Made that up in 1869. 1874, it was proven wrong. Still in textbooks today, used in our county. All over the world, they're still using this, even though it's been proven wrong since 126 years ago. 1874 also, a guy named Othniel Marsh. What a first name, huh? Bible name. N-I-E-L. Othniel C. Marsh. He was a fossil hunter, I believe. He made money hunting dinosaur fossils and stuff like that and digging them out and setting them up in museums. They would buy them off him. Othniel Marsh picked animal skeletons that he had found, or that other people had found, picked them from all over the world, and put them together in a series for, I believe it was for Harvard, and they still have it on display at Peabody Museum. I believe that's the one that got his original one. But he found a little bitty animal about the size of a fox, and then he found a slightly bigger animal, and a bigger one, and a bigger one, all the way up to a horse. He arranged them in this order you see in your textbooks, from the Hyracotherum up through the different kinds of horse-like animals, up to the modern horse called Equus. He put the animals in this order. Never did find them in that order. It's like finding an animal here, an animal on some other continent, and saying, wow, this one evolved into this one. Did not find them in that order. Did not even find them in the same place. He just arbitrarily arranged this order out of his imagination. That is still being taught in textbooks today as evidence for evolution. What he did not tell the folks, and I think they should have, is that this is not scientific. This is just pure theoretical, that we have this belief. It's interesting to note, the so-called ancient horse, it's a meat-eating animal, has sharp teeth where horses do not have sharp teeth. This little bitty animal has 18 pairs of ribs. The next one in his series has only 15 pairs of ribs. Now, what would cause an animal to lose? See, when you lose a complete set of ribs, you also lose the backbone that they attach to. You'd have to change the nerve system. You have to change the muscular system. You have to change the blood, the circulatory system. It's a major change. If I wanted you to change your car from running on 4 wheels to running on 3 wheels, what all would you have to change? A lot of stuff, right? The braking system, the steering system, the balance of the car. I mean, it's a major overhaul. And yet they're teaching this stuff, not only that it happened, but that it happened by chance. It wasn't designed, it just happened. Then the next so-called ancient horse had 19 pairs of ribs. So now you have another major serious problem. How are you going to get all this new nervous system, new muscular system? How's this animal going to survive? What about coordination? What about reproduction? Who's this 19-paired rib horse going to mate with? You got to have a male and a female evolve at the same time, in the same place. It's a big world, you know. And they got to find each other. You have a real serious problem. Now, I don't care if somebody wants to believe this, but that's not science, that's religion. Then it goes back to 18 pairs of ribs for the modern horse today. So, it's just baloney. But it's every textbook I've seen in countries around the world. Here's a textbook from Ireland telling the kids we've got evidence from evolution. The problem is this whole thing was proven wrong in 1950. Now, it never was true. But back in 1950, a major evolutionist named G.G. Simpson said, hey folks, it's not true. Anybody that studies horses will tell you there's a large variety of horses alive right now. And the horse and the zebra and the mule can all be interbred. A lady just wrote me a letter and sent me a bunch of pictures of her Zorse. She says, I have a zebra stallion, and I have a zebra mare, and I have a mule stallion and a mule mare, and I have horses. And she said, I crossbreed all of them every which way. She said, I got pictures about that. She said, if the male is the zebra, then it's called a Zorse. If the male is the horse and the female is a zebra, then they got another name for it or something like that. They cross ponies and zebras and get a Zioni. There's several websites about this competition. Who can produce the best Zioni and who can produce the best Zorse and all this kind of stuff. Back in this biology textbook, they said the other examples, including the much repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse, has not held up under close examination. What are they saying here? In other words, it's not true. All right? 1950, G.G. Simpson, George Gaylord Simpson, who was a strong believer and a proponent of evolution, he wrote an article in Scientific Monthly, 1950, October, that said many examples commonly cited, such as the evolution of the horse family or of saber-toothed tigers, can be readily shown to have been unintentionally falsified. In other words, it's not true. It was falsified. It's been proven to be incorrect. So here's the problems with the horse evolution. This would be a good quiz question. How do we know this is, or what's the problems with this teaching? It was made up by Othniel Marsh in 1874 from fossils scattered all over the world. Now, if you were going to take this to a court of law and say, I have proof for evolution because of this horse series, any freshman law student would say, Your Honor, he didn't even find these in the same place. He certainly didn't find them in the same order. And even finding fossils in order doesn't prove anything. See, the whole problem is evolution does not have to be proven in a court of law. It only has to be made believable for the students to fall for it. And they do by the millions. Okay? Russian scientists found modern horses in layers lower than the so-called ancient horse. Now here's how evolution is supposed to work. They say we've got these different layers of rock, and each one is a different age, and it all means something. Now, we covered earlier in seminar part CSE 102, those layers don't mean anything. They're not different ages. But use a typical textbook, have a cross-section showing the different layers of the earth, and they'll say this one is real old down here, and this one is the newest one on top. So, according to the theory, you should find modern horses up here, ancient horses down here, and it all sounds really good, but they don't find them in that order. They find what they call a so-called ancient horse, the Hyracotherum. Let's put an H right here for Hyracotherum, or for horse. Then they find a modern horse under it. It wouldn't be directly under it, but it would be in the layer of rock that is under it, maybe someplace else. Okay? Obviously, buried in that same layer, though. So if modern horses are already on the scene before the ancient horse is around, how can this be the ancestor of this? It can't be true, and it just can't be. The little Hyracotherum is not even a horse. It's just exactly like the hyrax, little rock badger, I believe, that's still running around today in the country of Turkey and in East Africa. So if they're still alive, then it's certainly not the ancestor. You couldn't prove any evolution from the little bitty Hyracotherum. Fourthly, the number of ribs are different, the number of toes are different, and the teeth are very different. The little Hyracotherum has sharp-pointed teeth. The horse today has a flat chewing tooth for grinding, grasses. That's what it eats. They're not related to each other. Fifthly, down in South America, when they find the fossils, the three-toed horses are on top, the one-toed horses are on the bottom. Absolutely reverse order from what is predicted by the theory. Now, the way theories are supposed to work, you create a theory, you look for evidence. If you find evidence that says, hey, this theory is wrong, well, then you throw the theory away and you get a new one. And that happens all through science except when it comes to evolution. because this theory is foundational for many other things, like a new world order coming soon to a city near you. Okay? They're never found in the order presented. Three-toed and one-toed horses are found side by side in the same strata. How can one be the ancestor to the other? Now the evolutionist will say to this one, they'll say, well, that's because the three-toed were gradually being phased out and the one-toed, you know, are better and they took over, but you just happened to find two in the same area during the time that they were being, you know, phased out. Well, I'm sorry. You can believe that if you want, but that's not science. Frank Sherwin, good friend of mine, has at Institute for Creation Research, has a lot of information on the horse evolution if you want to get a hold of him. And there's in the book Noah to Abram, The Turbulent Years, which we offer through our ministry, it's a really good one that has a section on this horse evolution, which has been proven wrong some time ago. One man named Dan Hicks in Tulsa, Oklahoma, kept after the Tulsa Zoo saying, why do you have this thing on display? It's been proven wrong years ago. I've got all the letters that Dan sent to the zoo and the zoo sent back to him. When he wrote to the zoo director and said, why don't you take this display down? It's not true. Okay? The director of the zoo wrote back and said, we don't have the funding to remove it. I've got the letters in my file. How much funding does it take to remove a display? I mean, I'll go do it for him in 10 minutes, okay? Give me a screwdriver and a hammer, we'll get it out of there. It's not a problem. So Dan had to get 2,000 signatures. He took up a petition. 2,000 people signed the petition saying, get this thing out of our zoo. Finally, they took it out. Now, if they had had a display in the zoo, like a Christmas scene representing Christ in the manger, one signature would have gotten it out, right? One person would complain about some, you know, singing some Christmas song in a public school, and they'll take it out. Here you get 2,000 people complain before they finally reluctantly remove the display. But I was up at Peabody Museum. I've been there many times. Every time I go to the Connecticut area, I stop in the Peabody just to keep my blood boiling, because they still have the horse evolution on display there. New Haven, Connecticut, yeah. Did I say? I said Connecticut, right? When I get it? Boston, okay, it's in Connecticut, yeah. While I stood there by that display, hundreds of kids came through, school group after school group. I mean, all day long, there's groups of parents and teachers bringing their kids through these museums. Never one word was said about this being wrong. Now, it's never been true, but it was demonstrated to be wrong 50 years ago. How many kids have been brainwashed by seeing this? See, the average student in school, he reads his textbook and then he goes to a museum and he sees this stuff on display and he thinks, wow, it must be true, it's been proven. So, to try to get this stuff out of the textbooks, that's not trying to get the Bible in. I just want this out. I just spent the last half hour talking to one of the Arkansas representatives from the state of Arkansas in Little Rock. He's a representative there. He was at the seminar I did a couple weeks ago in Springdale, Arkansas. He said, Brother Hovind, I'm a representative here in the House of Representatives, and you've got a bunch of Christians up here in the House and in the Senate that love your material, and we are going to write a law, try to pass a law that requires the Arkansas textbooks to be accurate, and we're going to say in the law, Arkansas will not provide funding for any books that contain the following information. Wow. About time. Every state ought to do that, you know. I said, you send me your textbooks, I'll go through them with a fine-tooth comb and I'll tell you what needs to be removed. There's an excellent book if you want all of the documentation on this type of stuff, written just 1999, Icons of Evolution. It's only available in hardback, so it's kind of expensive, but it is really tremendous. He goes through 15 different chapters, each chapter, one whole chapter about the horse evolution, one whole chapter about the gill slits, you know. If you want to document where things have been proven wrong, this guy has done a marvelous job. And I don't know if he's a creationist or an evolutionist. Doesn't matter. He's a researcher. Okay? You can get it through our ministry, through our bookstore out here. What they'll do, though, for the textbooks, they will arrange some animals in order, like this one. Shows, you know, the one bigger animal on top and a smaller animal on the bottom. Now, what's that do psychologically for the student who sees this? He thinks, wow, this is proof. Putting pictures on a page in a book is not evidence. It's evidence you have a good imagination. This is brainwashing, folks. First of all, they don't find the animals in the order that they predict. And even if you do find an animal buried on top of another animal, it doesn't prove they're related. Doesn't prove anything. Look, if I get buried on top of a hamster, does that prove he's my grandpa? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. It doesn't prove a thing. So just because you find fossil A here and fossil B here and fossil C here, so you found 3 bones in the dirt. That's all you found. You don't know any relationship. I've been doing years and years of research, though, on the evolution of the fork. Based on very, very fragmentary evidence I have found over the years, I've been able to piece together how forks evolved. I want you to know, folks, I put a lot of research into this, all non-taxpayer funded. This was just privately, on a private grant from my wife. I was allowed to research the evolution of silverware. I believe after intensive research, I discovered, of course, many things that did not survive, mutants that, weren't quite usable for some reason, and so they were thrown away. But I believe that knives probably came first. Very simple. Notice nice, neat, clean lines, not complicated at all. Slowly, over many millions of years, the knife evolved to a spoon. Great geological pressures would squeeze it and dish it out, made it wider. We just happened to get them that have the curved side on the right side to be useful to us. Can you imagine if spoons were all curved on the wrong side? You go to get your soup, it all falls off. Boy, it's a good thing evolution was so good to us, it made the curved side on the top instead of on the bottom. And then very slowly, over millions of years, the spoon got grooves cut in the end, probably by erosion. I'm not sure about that. Slowly, the grooves got deeper and longer and wider, and it went from a short tine fork to a long tine fork. While I was researching this, I became to quickly realize I have a missing link. See, right between the spoons and the forks, there's a serious missing link because spoons are rounded and have no grooves. Now, forks are squared and have grooves. That is 2 jumps. I don't think even punctuated equilibrium could do that. So I knew I had a missing link, but I just couldn't find it. Till one day I was flying to Connecticut to preach, and the stewardess walked down the aisle. Here we were 30,000 feet off the ground. Stewardess walks down the aisle and handed me the missing link. I don't think she knew what she had, but my trained scientific eye picked it up right away. I said, wow, I got it. The missing link. Later that day, the preacher said, hey, you want to go get some chicken for supper? I said, that'd be great, brother. We went to Popeye's Fried Chicken, and I found another missing link, folks. There they are, the missing links. So the evolution of silverware is nearly complete, which means I need to get a government grant now to renew my research and continue. About 30 or 40 million ought to do it. Eric, think we could finish up on this for 30 or 40 million? By the way, while I was doing research on this, people sent me stuff from all over the country, thinking they may have found, a link in this. There were some very obvious frauds. Somebody tried to pass off what is anybody should be able to tell. This is a fork head on a spoon handle. I didn't fall for it. I caught it right away. They glued them together, and they didn't get it past me. I just want you to know. So we do thorough research in this field. Arranging things in order doesn't prove a thing. If you arrange words in order, Alan Lawrence in the wheelchair, a good friend of ours here, Alan spent quite a bit of time putting words together to show how that you can turn a cat to a cot to a dot to a dog, changing one letter at a time. Does that prove the cat and the dog are closely related with only 2 intermediate species between them? No. Matter of fact, if you play around with this for a while, you can turn yourself into a fool before you know it. That's exactly what's happened to those who believe we all came from a rock, and Satan is laughing at them, and it's tragic. See, they're not the enemy, the devil's the enemy. And we've got to somehow learn to love the sinner and hate the sin, These guys who believe in evolution are not the enemy, they're the mission field. But as long as they're hurting other students, I think somebody ought to stand up to them and say, look, what you're doing is dangerous, it's wrong, you're destroying the faith of other students, knock it off. Okay? Textbooks now are teaching that dinosaurs turned to birds. This article says birds or dinosaurs are alive as birds. Well, I'm sorry, that is just simply a lie that has been proven wrong some time ago. That is ridiculous, of course, to change a dinosaur to a bird. Back in October '99, articles came out all over the papers, all over the world, saying that we have another missing link. We have proven evolution. We found a missing link between birds and dinosaurs. National Geographic, October '99. Proof, breaking news. The missing link We found it, folks. January 2000. Oops, sorry, it was a fake. They were fooled. Somebody had created this fossil. I guess they realized, you know, there's only been a few of these Archaeopteryx fossils found, and they're selling, if you could buy one, for millions of dollars. So all one guy would have to do is take 5 years out of his life and very carefully construct a fraud fossil. And he could make a bunch of money. Retire, him and the whole family retire for life. They had a deal in the paper a couple months ago about this fossil that's been on display for years in this museum. They're so proud of it. It's over 100 years it was on display. Then the plaster started falling off. They realized the whole thing had been faked. It was 100 years ago. It lasted 100 years before it fell apart, so I'm sure the guy spent his money and retired a long time ago. Okay. See, some people are so anxious to believe this theory, they will not look critically at the evidence that's presented. Now, they will look critically at stuff for creation, but they don't look critically at stuff for their own theory. The skeptics groups all over the country have this problem. They are so blinded, they won't even look at, they say, oh, I'm a skeptic. Well, I will ask them, are you skeptical of evolution? No, 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 I'm only skeptical of creation. Okay, well then you're not a skeptic. Okay, you're biased. There's a great article here in USA Today from February 3rd of the year 2000. Let's just read this here because we got to, those that are taking this course want to get all the details. Here's the details on proving that this thing was proven not true. Okay, from the remote, however you pronounce that, province in China, an unusual dinosaur fossil has made a mysterious journey from the hands of Chinese smugglers to the polished halls of the National Geographic Society in Washington. And like some cursed from a mummy's tomb, the Archaeoraptor, which is what they named it, supposedly a bird-like creature with the tail of a meat-eating dinosaur, has brought to those who would possess it what may be remembered as modern paleontology's greatest embarrassment. It now appears, after several months of suspicion and consternation, that this true missing link in the complex chain between dinosaurs and birds somehow sprouted its remarkable tail not 120 million years ago, but only a short time before being smuggled out of China. Whether a deliberate fake or an honest mistake, it is the tale of a tale that has children believing in feathered dinosaurs that never existed. Prominent scientists calling each other names and 2 respected science publications under assault. And just as the plot thickens, scientists in China have told USA Today that they have discovered yet another faked tale. This one added by an entrepreneurial Chinese farmer to a flying pterodactyl. That one appears to have fooled another group of relatives, another group of scientists, as well as the editors of the British journal Nature. Storrs Olson, curator of birds at the Smithsonian's Institute, National Museum of Natural History, turned the spotlight on the whole mess. Those involved with the scientific gaffe agree that Olson tried to warn officials at National Geographic in a letter sent November 1st that the organization was headed for embarrassment if it endorsed the fossil. Both of the faked fossils were intended to support the theory that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Now Olson, who is an outspoken opponent of the theory, is taking advantage of this moment to renew an old debate on the origin of birds. The popular view, thanks most recently to the fictitious Jurassic Park, is that birds evolved from dinosaurs. National Geographic and Nature have co-published magazine articles and scientific papers supporting the view. Museums, including the American Museum of Natural History in New York, also promote exhibits of the dinosaur origin of birds. But Olson and a group of academic ornithologists, a person who studies birds, have been arguing, often bitterly for years, that birds evolved independently of dinosaurs. They believe that dinosaurs and birds had a common ancestor that lived in trees, and that dinosaurs were, after all, cold-blooded. Like the Chinese dino bird, the Archaeopteryx is fake too. The following excerpt is taken from the website creationscience.com, which is Walt Brown's website. Tremendous material, by the way. Honest disagreement over whether Archaeopteryx was not a forgery was possible until 1986, when a definitive test was performed. An X-ray resonance spectrograph of the British Museum fossil showed the material containing the feather impressions differed slightly from the rest of the fossil slab. Differed significantly from the rest of the slab. In other words, it was made of a paste. Someone apparently had taken the rock, ground up some of it to powder, made a paste out of it, and then put feather impressions in it. Some people are really desperate to believe this theory, and so they will accept it. But guess what? Textbooks are still teaching today dinosaurs are the descendants of birds. Now, it takes a while to get textbooks accurate, I understand that, but somebody in the different towns, if we're supposed to be the salt of the earth, okay, salt preserves. Who's going to preserve? I mean, tomorrow morning, kids in Escambia County, Florida, are going to be taught this. Well, let's do something about it, okay? Let's fix it. There are several ways to fix the problem. We'll get into that later in this course, but one way is just simply educate all the students. Grassroots. That is unstoppable, but it takes a long time to accomplish that. The other way is to educate all the teachers. Just get all the teachers where they don't believe in this theory. The third and more complicated and much slower way, and probably least likely to succeed way, is to pass laws, try to attack the Capitol and say, look, get this stuff out of the books. And I think we should work on all three fronts on that one. But telling kids that dinosaurs turn to birds is ridiculous. Look, in case you don't know, you don't just put a few feathers on a dinosaur and say, let's go, man, try it, it won't hurt too bad. Okay, it's not quite that simple. Dinosaurs are very, very different from birds. Somewhere along the line, if he's going to turn from a dinosaur to a bird, his front legs are going to have to turn to wings. Which means at, say, 50% of the way, he's got a half leg and a half wing. It's not enough to fly yet, but now he can't run very good either. Very well, Jan, English teacher, right? So who's going to feed this critter? He can't run and he can't fly. Think the other animals are going to bring him food and feel sorry for him while he's slowly evolving into something else? See, in order for evolution to work, all of the intermediate stages have to be superior to the original. Nobody's ever demonstrated that. Not one time has that been demonstrated, that it's even possible. Secondly, we never see any animal produce a different kind of animal. Nobody ever observes any of this. It's pure fiction. They make it up. There's a textbook from Glencoe, 99 edition, saying, we have evidence from science that dinosaurs turn to birds. They're still teaching this stuff. Dinosaurs did not turn to birds. Alan Fiducia is considered one of the world's experts on birds. Okay, he teaches at university in North Carolina, UNC, Chapel Hill. He said, and I quote, paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it's not. It is a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleo-babble is going to change that. The word archaeo will be a good quiz question here. Archaeo means ancient. And pteryx is a Greek word, or Latin or whatever, for wing. So Archaeopteryx is ancient wing. If it has the word archaeo in it, it means old or ancient, okay? He says it's a perching bird. See, a bird's foot has a claw sticking out the back. One of his toes comes out the back so he can land and grab a tree branch. Reptiles don't have that. So just the toe structure would have to radically change to go from a walking foot to a grasping foot. Not too many birds do a lot of both, okay? They either nest in trees a lot or they walk on the ground a lot. But it's difficult for a bird that walks on the ground a lot to be comfortable nesting in trees because the toes are different. They're designed for what they're designed for. So Archaeopteryx means ancient wing. Archaeo is the word ancient. They will point out that the Archaeopteryx has claws on his wings. Now let me point out to you, only 6, I believe now, 5 or 6 Archaeopteryx fossils have been found. The first one was found in Germany in, I think, 1859. Somewhere around that date, okay? What was going on around 1859? Darwin's book. People are looking to criticize the Bible anyway. A lot of countries have thrown off the king, anti-monarchy, and the Bible says honor the king, and so they thought the Bible was an obstacle. There was a real problem in the world in the early and mid-1800s where evolution came along at the right time where it was readily accepted. They're looking for this theory anyway. Also, evolution teaches, we'll get into more of this later, that different races might be superior to other races. 1859, we had slavery in this country. Civil War wasn't fought till a couple years later. Emancipation Proclamation wasn't until 1863. So when Darwin came out and said there are favored races, some people said, well, hey, obviously that's the whites over the blacks. Hitler comes along and says, no, obviously that's the Norwegians and the Germans, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you know, they were the superior race. And a lot of people use this theory to justify what was already happening or what they're already doing anyway. And then along came guys who said, well, hey, if evolution is true, then there are no moral rules. There are no standards. By the way, it is a good, fair question. If evolution is true, how do you tell right from wrong? Yeah, you don't ask the question, what's right and what's wrong. You ask, first of all, how do you tell what's right and wrong? How do you make this decision? And that's a critical issue you got to talk about. Now, there are quite a few birds today that have claws on their wings. At least 12 birds right now have claws on their wings. This fellow says, Stahl adds that some ornithologists call the Hoatzin. A Hoatzin is a bird that lives in South America. They call it the stink bird because it smells so bad. I guess that's how it repels predators, okay? It just, who'd want to eat it? You know, you get close, I'm hungry, but no thanks, you know. The Hoatzin does not fly long distances, okay? It's a poor flyer, but it can fly just fine. It's a poor flyer because it has a shallow breastbone. See, birds, when they fly, the chest muscles have to be enormous, you know, to be able to fly, flap the wings. So the bone that these muscles attach to has to be very deep to allow for all that. Like you have a breastbone in the center of your chest, but you don't have, it's not real thick, you know, sticking way out, because you don't use those muscles as much as a bird would, obviously. So Archaeopteryx has what's called a shallow breastbone. It's not real deep. Well, the reason for that is because it has a crop where it eats leaves, actually. These leaves have to be ground up. It doesn't have any chewing teeth, but so it eats these leaves, and the crop has to chew them up by they swallow rocks. You know, birds even today pick up rocks so they can grind their food up. So because Archaeopteryx, because of its diet, it has a large crop, therefore it has a shallow breastbone. And so some people look at the, I'm not Archaeopteryx, I mean Hoatzin, okay? They look at the Hoatzin and say, wow, this is, you know, a missing link. Well, first place, it's not missing, it's still alive, okay? You can go down to South America and get them. But it is a poor flyer, but when it's born, when it hatches out of the egg, it has claws on its wings. And it uses these little claws to climb up trees. Can't fly yet, but it climbs around with these little claws on the wings. The swan has claws on its wings. The ibis does, and many birds, he says, have wing claws. They just never make use of them. Archaeopteryx had teeth in its beak. Well, I point out only 2 known birds have teeth in their beak, Archaeopteryx and what's called the Hesperornis. Most birds do not have teeth. But some fish have teeth, some don't. Some reptiles have teeth, some don't. Some mammals have teeth, some don't. Some of you have teeth, some don't, okay? It doesn't prove anything. And obviously, a kindergartner ought to be able to figure it out. If you're going from used to have teeth to don't have teeth, that's not getting better. But that's an example for evolution. They'll say this bird lost its teeth. Well, how is losing something evolution? That's backwards compared to what you need. This one says, this textbook, Hope Biology 94, says the descendants are the birds which evolved about 150 million years ago. Bird feathers evolved from the same scales that protected the dinosaurs so well. Now imagine yourself, high school student, teacher says, for homework tonight, read the following 8 pages and answer the questions at the end of the chapter. You remember in high school, you're going to read those 8 pages reluctantly and answer the questions as quick as you can. And one of the questions is going to be, you know, what did feathers evolve from? You're going to say scales, because that's what they told you in the book. It is so unfair to send students off to war. I mean, if an enemy country attacked the United States, would we send all the 5th graders off to fight them? No, you guys are in the Marines. You get the biggest and the brightest and the best. Well, not Marines, the brightest, but you get the biggest and the strongest you can get. I'm sorry, Steve. And you send them off. You want to get the best you got out there. And you give them the best weapons available. And you pay them the most money of anybody gets paid in the country. Is that right? Well, not quite, but almost, right, Steve? You don't send 5th graders off to battle. We have a real serious problem with lies in our textbooks, and we're sending the kids off to have to fight against this. The adults ought to be fixing this one. It's very simple. This is not true. So you go to your school board, your county, whoever's selecting your textbooks, and say, look, the information on page 214 is wrong. Let's cut that page out of the book. We'll get into more later on what you can do about the lies in the textbook, some practical steps to attempt to take. Their argument is that feathers came from scales. There are some very serious problems with this argument. And we're going to talk about that after we take a little short break here. But they're teaching that scales turned into feathers. Well, animals today still have scales. Why aren't they turning into feathers? How many animals are alive right now that have scales, would you guess? Billions and billions? Do we ever see one even starting to evolve? It's so ridiculous. The Bible says God sends them strong delusion. I can't think of anybody being more deluded than somebody believing we came from a rock over billions of years. They are deluded. And I feel sorry for them. The devil has blinded them. You know, we want to try to win them to the Lord. All right, let's talk about this scales and feathers. The argument is they have to be related because they're both made from the same material. Feathers are made out of a protein called keratin. Scales are made out of the same protein. So are fingernails. So is hair. What does that prove? Nothing. Okay? This floor is made out of wood. So is the roof. So are the walls. Does that prove that one evolved from the other? No. It proved the guy who built this room, me, chose a common material to do different things. This one we're walking on, and this one is keeping the rain off of us. And this one is keeping the wind out. Okay? You used a common material for different functions. Wood can be used to build a boat. It can be used to build a fire. It can be used for all sorts of things, okay? So the argument is because they're both made from keratin, therefore that proves one evolved from the other. Now again, if this had to be taken to a court of law, it'd be laughed at. But it never is, okay? And it needs to be. The protein keratin, K-E-R-A-T-I-N. By the way, somebody sent me a slide years ago that I used in my seminar about this when before I was using PowerPoint, I was using slides. Other people would make slides for me and send them to me. Somebody sent me a slide and keratin was misspelled with a C. I didn't catch it. And I used the slide for, I don't know, several months. And one woman I debated used that as evidence that nobody should listen to me because I don't know the difference between keratin, which is the coloring found in carrots, and the protein keratin with a K. Okay? So therefore, everything else I say must be wrong. Well, I apologize for the misspelling. Spelling was not my strong point in school anyway, and nor is it now. But praise God for spell checker, right? But even still, that's ridiculous, okay? I apologize for getting the wrong spelling, but I do know what I'm talking about. Yes, they're both made of keratin, but that doesn't prove any relationship. Battleships and forks are both made from the same metal. Aren't they? See, that proves they both evolved from a tin can 18 million years ago. That's the type of logic they're using here. Actually, scales and feathers develop from different genes on the chromosome. This DNA strand, this chromosome strand, each of the rungs across that ladder is called a gene. Those different genes do different things, okay? A certain section of the gene code tells the reptile to make scales, which is actually just a folded, hard part of skin, okay? The feathers come from a different section of the chromosome. It doesn't come from the corresponding section of the chromosome on the bird like it does on the reptile. At the morphological level, studying this thing scientifically, feathers are traditionally considered homologous with reptilian scales. However, in development, that means as they develop, the genes that code for the feather and the scale are coming from a different part. In morphogenesis, in gene structure, in protein shape and sequence, the filament formation and structure, feathers are different. They're different in every way from a scale. Clearly, feathers provide a unique and outstanding example of an evolutionary novelty. The guy gets a little bit of it, but he don't get it, does he? He still thinks it's evidence for evolution. But he says they couldn't come from scales, that's for sure. Another serious problem you have trying to teach that reptiles turn to birds is the lungs are different. You and I have two lungs, as you breathe in and you breathe out. The diaphragm at the bottom pulls down, sucks the air in, pushes up to push the air out. Birds have a very different type of lung because flying takes an enormous amount of oxygen. So they have to have a lot more oxygen. The oxygen goes into the bird's lungs and goes through all these tubes. It is totally different. Now, if you're going to go from a reptile-type lung to a bird-type lung, you'd have to have a zillion changes in between the two. And not only would the lungs have to change, the blood supply to the lungs. The genetic information to supply that change for the next generation has to change. Who's this bird going to marry, or half-bird going to marry? You got all these same problems again. Okay. You probably could list 30 or 40 problems with this, but the lung structure is totally different between reptiles and birds. Okay. There's no similarity at all. Another major problem they have, by their geologic column dating, modern birds exactly like we have today are found way down here, lower than the so-called Archaeopteryx. They've been saying Archaeopteryx, by the way, we got a new economy-sized piece of chalk here. They're saying Archaeopteryx is 65 million years old. Well, look at this article. A 130 million year old crow-sized bird dubbed however you say that, Confuciosaurus, okay, New Mexico Museum of Natural History in Albuquerque. Well, now, just a minute. If a 65 million year old bird is the ancestor to birds today, and you've already got birds around 130 million years ago, am I seeing a problem here? Archaeopteryx can't fit in anywhere. In western Colorado's dry mesa quarry, Brigham Young University archaeologists have come upon the 140 million year old remains of what they are calling the oldest bird ever found. It is obvious that we must now look for the ancestors of flying birds in a period much older than that in which the Archaeopteryx lived. Well, now hold on a minute. Do you see from this statement, he is admitting Archaeopteryx can't be a missing link. He's admitting birds were already here, by his thinking, 130 million years ago. And then he says we have to look for a different way they evolved. He still doesn't get it. He just doesn't, jump frog, jump. He just doesn't get it. Maybe it's time to consider, Mr. whatever your name is here, maybe it's time to consider that the entire theory is baloney. When the guys came back from Africa and said, folks, we have strong evidence that some dinosaurs are still alive. And then he said, it's amazing they survived for 70 million years. Still doesn't get it. The whole geologic column is baloney. That's the problem. Here's another one. The remains of a bird which lived between 142 and 137 million years ago, recently found in China. The discovery made by fossil hunting farmer announced by a Chinese-American team of scientists, including Alan Fiducia from UNC and Larry Martin from University of Kansas, provide the oldest evidence of a beaked bird on Earth yet found. The Chinese bird, claim its discoverers, probably lived at the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary prior to the arrival of these other ones and could not possibly have descended from them. My point is, even evolutionists are admitting birds were around, by their twisted geologic thinking, before Archaeopteryx. So why do textbooks still teach the kids tomorrow in our county that Archaeopteryx is a missing link? That ought to be removed. You can document it's not true. Jurassic Bird challenges origin theories from GeoTimes, 1996. This guy says, there are plenty of other reasons to refute the dinosaur-bird connection. says Fiducia. How do you derive birds from a heavy, earthbound, bipedal reptile that has a deep body, a heavy balancing tail, and 4 shortened forelimbs? Biophysically, it's impossible. Here's the problems that I see. The lungs are totally different. Modern birds are found in layers lower than dinosaurs. I mean, according to them, dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Yet they're saying we've got birds 130 million years old, 140 million. How can dinosaurs turn to birds when birds are there before dinosaurs were even gone? Scales and feathers attach to the body very differently, and they develop from different genes on the chromosomes. Birds have a 4-chambered heart. Most reptiles have 3. Here's another very serious problem with this, because a 3-chambered heart brings in the blood from the lungs, which has oxygen, and it brings in blood from the rest of the body, which does not have oxygen. Your body's used it up, and it mixes them, and it sends it out as a mixture. It's only half oxygenated, and they can survive just fine on that. That's why a lot of lizards and reptiles, they lay around an awful lot. Okay, they just don't have the energy to run around hard all day, like our dog. But birds have a 4-chambered heart, and so do humans, by the way. So the blood goes from your body into the heart, then it's pumped to the lungs, comes from the lungs back into the heart, then it's pumped back out to the body. So all of it goes through the lungs one time. So it's going to get oxygen. Reptiles don't do that. Now, a few reptiles do have a 3-chambered heart. Okay, I'm sorry, a few reptiles do have a 4-chambered heart, but most do not. They found a dinosaur fossil here recently. They said the heart was petrified. Very unusual, but I've got pictures of that. I'll add it in here to part 4. Make a note, Marlissa, to remind me to move that picture into part 4. I think I have it now in part 7b, if I'm not mistaken. But and they found this dinosaur skeleton and the rock inside the chest. They said this is his heart, and it could very well be. I don't know. And they've x-rayed it and said we think it has 4 chambers to it. That could very well be also. And they're saying, see, in order to go from a dinosaur to a bird, one thing that has to change is the heart, and we've got proof that it changed. Well, you got a long stretch there from the evidence. Okay. Reptiles lay leathery eggs. Have you ever seen a turtle egg? You know, it's real leathery like shell. Birds have a hard egg that cracks very easily. Watch when they have the crocodiles hatching out on TV. You'll see the egg, you know, kind of crumbles like a raisin. Bird eggs don't do that. Okay? So the eggs are totally different. Swinson, British Museum of Natural History, they've got the largest fossil collection in the world. He said, the evolutionary origin of birds is largely a matter of deduction. There is no fossil evidence of the stages through which the remarkable change from reptile to bird was achieved. Notice what he says here. He still believes in evolution, doesn't he? He thinks the change was achieved, doesn't he? But we just have no evidence for it. So he's not going to abandon the theory. He's just going to admit there's no evidence. Well, that's, I suppose, step 1. I doubt he'll ever take step 2 because he loses his job, you know, but he did take step 1. Yay. There is no evidence for it. And again, the book Icons of Evolution has a whole chapter on the flaws in the bird change. So you can get that book. It's got a great section on that. So Richard Dawkins, who hates creationists, says, it is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or wicked. Boy, this guy's real open-minded for a discussion, isn't he? This shuts down communication, of course. And this tells Richard Dawkins' students would say, don't even talk to creationists because they're stupid. And that's the attitude that's out there, folks. Sir Arthur Keith strongly believed in evolution. He wrote the foreword to Darwin's book. They republished the book every once in a while. And when they republished it on the 100-year anniversary, which is going to be a big deal, 1959, 100-year anniversary of Darwin's book, they said, Sir Arthur Keith, you're one of our favorite evolutionists of the day. We would like to honor you with giving you the right to write the introduction to the book. Arthur Keith said, evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation. And that is unthinkable. In other words, you're not allowed to think about that. That's quite a confession. And they printed it in the front of Darwin's book when it was republished in 1959. Well, I appreciate Sir Arthur Keith's honesty. He's right. It's unproved, it's unprovable. By the way, so is creation. You can't scientifically prove either theory of origins. So the obvious question comes up, if neither one can be proven, if both have to be taken by faith, why do all of us pay for one to be taught in the schools? When I offer my $250,000 for anybody with evidence for evolution, they will say, of course we can't prove evolution, can you prove creation? And I say, oh no, can't do that. And they say, well see, what's the big deal? I say, well obviously the big deal is, how come I have to pay for your religion to be taught? And thinking evolutionists are totally stumped by that. It finally dawns on them, wow, he's right. Look, if you believe in evolution, that's fine, you have a right to do that. If you want to believe you came from a rock, that's perfectly fine. I don't care what you believe. You want to use my tax dollars to teach my kids your theory that we came from a rock? Oh, now, right there we have a little problem. That's where we're going to draw the line. Now I'm going to go to my grave, probably early, because of preaching against this. But, okay, it's just, I'm not going to shut up about it, okay? We're going to fix this or die trying. Professor Bunauer at the Strasbourg Zoological Museum said, evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. Long ago and far away. Isn't that what evolution says? He says, the theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It is useless. On my video number 7, question-answer, I've got now an entire giant list of scientists who believed in creation all through history and today. The guy who invented the MRI machine is a creationist. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of scientists. All of the major branches of science were started by creationists. Now, they weren't all independent, temperamental, fundamental, right-wing, radical Baptists like me, but they were creationists, okay? They believed in a creator. So can anybody name me, and I ask this question to professors in debates frequently, can you name me one scientific advancement we have because of the evolution theory? Is that why we have light bulbs? Is that why we have computers? Is that why we have been able to go to the moon? Has the space program? Now, a lot of money is spent on the space program to try to prove evolution. No question. But what part of evolution theory caused the space program? He's right. The theory is useless. Even if it's true, it's useless. And if it's not true, it's dangerous. It's worse than useless. Malcolm Muggeridge spoke at University of Waterloo. I've spoken there. That's where the girl with the blue hair and all the ears pierced 15 times and tattoos on her neck, and she came up. It was so funny. Here I am speaking on creation in the University of Waterloo, you know, Canada. A whole crowd of students gathered around, you know, and we had gotten permission to set up a table and a microphone and draw a crowd. And boy, did we draw a crowd. It's a very liberal university. And she walked right up. Here I am speaking away, you know, and talking to the crowd. And she walks up right in front of me and says, you got permission to do this? I said, yes, ma'am, we do. She said, this is kind of weird. That's all I could do to maintain my composure. Lady, you want to see weird? Come with me. Let's go find a mirror. I will show you weird. Man. I mean, hair about that long and all bright blue, you know. I don't care if you're going to cut your hair and call it blue, but don't call me weird, all right? Malcolm Muggeridge said, I myself am convinced the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it has been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future. Posterity will marvel that so flimsy and dubious an hypothesis could be accepted with the incredible credulity that it has. Why would so many smart people, smart in other areas, accept this theory? He's right. Someday, they're going to be laughing at those people who believe in evolution. But in the meantime, it accomplishes the goal of keeping them from Christ, or if they're Christians, of keeping them from being bold Christians, because they got all these questions. You were saying how you were taught this stuff in school. I'm telling you, it'll destroy your faith. If you're already saved, it'll neutralize you. If you're not saved, it'll probably keep you from getting saved. That's exactly what Satan wants. He's a liar. He doesn't care how he gets it done. Just get the job done. This man said, scientists who go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men. The story they are teaching may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact. I was debating Pigliucci at the University of Knoxville, Tennessee. He's a botany professor. He spent 30 years teaching evolution of plants. He's been teaching it for 30 years. He's received $655,000 grant money to study the evolution of plants. I said, Dr. Pigliucci, what is your best evidence for evolution? He said, the fossil evidence of whales. Now hold it. How come the best evidence you have is in somebody else's field? I don't think he'll ever catch on to that, but I mean, that ought to dawn on somebody. Like, he thinks the paleontologists have the evidence. Now, if you ask a paleontologist, what's your best evidence of evolution? Oh, the evolution of plants. We've got it proven in the botany department. Okay. It's one of those shell games. Yeah, nobody has the evidence. Okay, there isn't any. Pierre de Chardin was a Catholic priest, kind of a renegade Catholic priest. He is one of the fellows involved in the Piltdown hoax. He may have been the guy who did it. We don't know, okay? Pierre de Chardin has a very shady history, okay? He is probably one of the primary fellows, if not the primary fellow, responsible for getting the Catholics to accept evolution. 3 different times, popes have come out and said, evolution fits our religion just fine, except for when God gave them a soul. Basically like Hugh Ross teaches, okay? Hugh Ross gets along great with the Catholics as far as their doctrine of, you know, evolution blending in with creation. Pierre de Chardin said, evolution is a general postulate to which all theories, all hypotheses, must henceforth bow in order to be thinkable and true. Evolution is a light which illuminates all facts, which all lines of thought must follow. This is what evolution is. I'd say he's kind of committed to the theory, wouldn't you? My Bible says God's Word is a light. It's a lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path. Evolution is not a light that everybody must follow. But if a kid goes to school 12 or 16 or 20 years in our town, now you got to understand, Escambia County is one of the top counties in the country as far as churches per capita. I think Santa Rosa County is in the Guinness Book of World Records. There are more churches per person in that county, I believe, than any place else in the United States. And I think we're a close second. We're certainly up in the top 2 or 3 percentage points in all the counties in America. Here we have, I think, 120 Baptist churches in this county. Probably well over 200 churches of other denominations. There's an awful lot of churches in this county. And yet kids are going to go to school in this county and learn all these things that have been proven wrong for many years. What are we doing about it? We're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Salt preserves. When I first moved to town, I started writing letters to the editor about evolution. That's what started my whole ministry, writing letters to the editor. I went down and talked to Katie Knight, the lady in charge of selecting the science curriculum. I went in and I said, look, you're teaching things in these books that have been proven wrong a long time ago. After several meetings with her and letters back and forth, she said, Mr. Hovind, you are the only person in the entire county who's complaining about this. Well, first, I hope that's not true. But if it is true, that's a sad commentary on Christians. We got a lot of Christians who are more worried about who wins some dumb Super Bowl game than what the kids are going to be taught tomorrow that's going to affect their life possibly forever. Certainly for this life it's going to affect them. And it has cost, you know, all 3 of my kids are in the room here tonight. You know, when we started this ministry 12 years ago, it's cost you 3. Dad was gone a lot. I'm still gone a lot. I take this battle seriously. It's been a sacrifice for my family. It's been a sacrifice for me personally. This is a war, folks. You guys in the Marines are willing to go off to war, leave your family, possibly get killed. Praise God. I'm glad you're out there defending my freedoms. Well, I'm out there defending your freedoms on this creation evolution topic. We need some more people doing that. Salt preserves. Our job is to preserve from corruption. We're not doing it. Salt also irritates. If nobody's irritated at you, you're probably not a very good Christian. You can pretty much tell how good a Christian somebody is by how many people hate him. You know, everybody says, oh, you should love love. Yeah, I do. If you love God, people will hate you. If nobody hates you, then you don't love God very well, do you? So why do people believe in this theory anyway? Why would anybody believe we came from a rock? Well, some people believe it because that's all they've ever been taught. When I spoke in the university in Chernovtsi, Ukraine, they had 30 professors. Are you from Chernovtsi? You're from Russia, not Ukraine, right? Okay. You're from Chernovtsi? Okay. When I was in your town in Ukraine, I spoke at the university. 30 professors came, sat in the room. I spoke for 2 hours. These 30 professors sitting in the room, I'm speaking for 2 hours to an interpreter. After 1 hour of speaking on creation and evolution, one of the professors began to cry. There was a lady interpreting for me. They had several interpreters. I wear them out because I talk kind of fast, you know. At the time, there was a lady interpreting for me. I said, ma'am, what's he crying about? And she said, oh, he's happy. He didn't know there was a creation story. He's never heard of this. He wants you to keep going. All he's ever heard all of his life is evolution. Last week, I spoke in Seattle, Washington, 4 different Russian churches, about 1,000 people each time. People came to me afterwards and said, we've never heard this stuff. In Soviet Union, creation was censored out. Capitalism was censored out. Guess what? In America, creationism is censored out. I went to a library one time. I go to a lot of libraries. I don't remember where it was even, but I got in this massive library with some university. I got on their computer Erica search program, and I said, how many books do you have in here about evolution? 1,400 titles. How many books by? And I typed in some major evolutionist authors, you know, Stephen Gould, Niles Eldredge, and these kind of guys. Buku books, okay? This library is jammed with books on evolution. So I typed in to see how many books there were on creation. Up came about 9 titles. All of them were anti-creation books. Books written by evolutionists against creation. But the search program caught it as having the word creation in the title or the subject, okay? So I went to the librarian. I said, ma'am, why do you have 1,400 books about evolution and no books about creation? I searched under all the major creation authors. Henry Morris, Dwayne Gish, Ken Ham, all of them I could think of, okay? 0. I said, ma'am, this is a university. I thought students are coming here to get educated. It looks to me like they're only getting indoctrinated. You don't even have a balance in your library. I'm sure you don't have it in your classroom. I said, why don't you have any books in here about creation? She said, we do have a book in here about creation. I put it in here myself. I said, oh, what is it? She told me the name of it. I said, where's that from? She said, from the Watchtower Society. Oh, well, yeah, you got one Jehovah's Witness book in here about creation, and the rest are, and even they believe in the gap theory or the day-age theory, something like that. They believe the earth is, you know, billions of years old. So they're no help. They're no help in a lot of areas, but I think an awful lot of folks believe this theory because they simply have never heard the other side. Now, I think it doesn't take somebody too intelligent to realize if creation and evolution were both taught to the students, equal time, fair, honest, balanced treatment, which one would the students believe? Creation, right? They don't want that. They don't want the competition because they'd lose. I believe it was John D. Rockefeller, one of those multi-gazillionaires in the last century, who said competition is a sin. When he was developing Standard Oil Company to the monster company that it was, let's suppose there's 10 gas stations in a town. Rockefeller would buy 6 of them, 7 of them. And back then, let's say gas is going for 20 cents a gallon. It costs the station 18 cents a gallon. They sell it, make 2 cents. He would lower his price to 16. He would lose money for months on those 6 stations in that town. What's going to happen to the other 4 gas stations? They're going to go out of business. He's going to buy them. Now he owns all 10. Now guess what happens to the price of gas? 22 cents a gallon. We got to make up for what we lost, you know. That's exactly what happened all over. His philosophy was competition is a sin. Eliminate the competition. That's the philosophy of the evolutionist in the classroom. They don't want the kids to see the other side. And because of this, many kids have never even heard about the creation story. Many kids in Escambia County have never had a fair shake on the creation story. Here's a Russian textbook. Guess what they use for evidence for evolution? Same stuff they use here. It's the same all over the world. I think people believe in evolution because their job depends upon it. If a professor at the University of West Florida up here in Pensacola if one of the biology or anthropology or geology or botany, any of the sciences, if they got up in front of their class tomorrow morning, or Jan at PJC where you teach, if a science teacher gets up tomorrow and says, students, I don't believe evolution anymore, I believe in creation, what's going to happen? They're going to lose their job. If they're tenured, where they can't lose their job because they got 20 years teaching there, they will demote them to something, janitor, lab assistant. They will put them in a position where they cannot influence other students with their radical ideas. Dean Kenyon, K-E-N-Y-O-N, he was a biology professor, university in California, I think San Francisco State or Sanford, I don't remember which one. He wrote books about evolution. He believed in evolution. For 20 years, he was the poster boy of the evolutionists. He got converted. Then he wrote a book, which we sell in our library, called Of Pandas and People. Great supplemental biology book. He never mentions God. He just says, look how well designed this is. Somebody must have designed this, you know. There must be intelligence behind this. When he talks about the bones in the wrist or, you know, any part of the biology. They actually fired him because he became a creationist. There was a lawsuit over it. He got his job back. They put him in as a lab assistant. Usually college juniors and seniors do that, you know, clean up the test tubes, please. They tried everything to keep that guy, get him out of there. If he had not been tenured with 20 years, you know, tenured, they can't fire him, he'd have been out the door. When we get to part 7, I've been collecting for years now a list of people who have lost their jobs because they became creationists. That's the reason. We'll get into more of that probably by the time we get to CSE 1020 at the time we're going here, or at the rate we're going here. Okay, but we'll get there eventually. Some people honestly like this theory because they hope there's no God. Evolution is the only way to explain why are we here without bringing God into the equation. I mean, how did we get here? The 4 great questions of life. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going when we die? Those questions can only be answered with either somebody made us or we made ourselves. And a lot of people really like evolution because it removes God from the equation and they get to be God. Some people believe in evolution because they have social, political reasons. Evolution is the foundation for communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism. We'll get into all that in a couple of weeks. More on the history of this evolutionary theory. Some simply have too much pride to admit they're wrong. I do debates with professors. I'll point out clearly, look, you're wrong right here. The audience will agree, yep, you're wrong. He goes on to a new topic. They never admit, okay, I'm wrong. I've never had an opponent in a debate do that. I spent all day today editing the Pigliucci debate number 12 that we're offering now. And that's why it's fresh in my mind. I saw it about 20 times in there, you know. You're wrong. He would never say, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. The Bible says in 2 Thessalonians, for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. If anybody believes we came from a rock, first place, that's a lie, and you have to be deluded to believe that. So, our textbooks in our county right here, there's a bunch on the table right there, contain things that have been proven wrong many years ago. What should we do about it? What are the practical steps? If I announce tonight that I have discovered top secret information that a truckload of tainted, poisonous milk was delivered to all the public schools this afternoon after the schools closed. They're going to serve it for breakfast and lunch tomorrow. You follow me? I've got secret information that a truckload of poisoned milk was sent to the schools. It's going to be delivered tomorrow. How would you feel? What would you do about it? Well, folks, a truckload of poisonous books was sent to our schools months ago. It's going to be fed to the kids tomorrow. Let's find something to do about it. Next class, we'll talk about what to do about it. Lies in the textbooks, how can we fix it? Let's do something about it. Thank you so much. Dismissed.